Welcome to the Golden Shadow. My name is Arran Rogerson.
And I'm Alyssa Polizzi.
Today we're talking about active imagination. This is a practice where we allow the unconscious to express itself through different creative mediums and meditations. It's a method of assimilating unconscious contents through some form of self-expression. And this is kind of vague, and this is why active imagination is something that I personally have trouble making sense of. Alyssa and I have gotten into a lot of arguments about what active imagination actually is. So this episode is going to have perhaps a more curious and playful tone than usual, even though honestly we're usually pretty curious and playful. But we're exploring something that I don't really know how to wrap my head around, and I can't seem to manifest it in my own practice. And I have some gripes, you might say, with how it's being defined. So that's why this episode is going to be an exploration of this vague phenomenon, active imagination. So Alyssa, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. Active imagination, this very specific term comes from, of course, Jungian psychology, which we talk about quite often on the podcast. And it's a technique that was developed by Jung, I think primarily during the years of his confrontation with the unconscious, breaking off with Freud, going very deep into this space of turmoil and inner exploration.
It's the time of the Red Book.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, the Red Book and most recently the Black Books that have come out. This was documented, these experiences that he had, and naturally sort of found himself in this place where he would drop into this very deeply kind of meditative trance-like space, and all of these images from the unconscious were coming up, and how he worked with them, the ability to kind of dive further, to gain clarity, to kind of dream the dream onward, as some may say, came from this time and was later then integrated into the practice of analytical psychology. So it became this tool for dream work, understanding dream images, fantasies, all of these different aspects that seem to appear from the unconscious. Even a mood hits you, let's do some active imagination on that. So it was born from really trying to understand the purity of unconscious contents.
Right. This kind of reminds me of our conversation about dreams.
That's right.
One way that I can try and make sense of what we're talking about is there's almost this notion of the unconscious expressing itself uninhibited.
Right.
Except when you're dreaming, you're asleep. And it happens automatically.
Right.
It's almost like you have no control over it. And maybe even if you're having a lucid dream, you still don't really have control over what is being created, the world that's being shaped, the images that are coming across.
Yeah.
And it kind of seems like active imagination is at least pointing to this idea of that happening while you're awake in some regard.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not accurate to say it's a waking dream. That might be misleading. But there's something about the unconscious speaking and you letting it speak.
Right.
And trying to get into that mode with the intention of gaining some insights or letting the unconscious sort of process maybe, or there's something therapeutic about the intention.
Sure.
Letting this happen.
Yes,
it
definitely.
is like a kind of meditative practice almost. But when you say meditative still, it might be misleading to some people who have a strong association with that word meditation.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to find the right words. And I think that's partly why we've struggled so far.
Certainly. I definitely struggle with not being able to define something.
Yeah.
And that's when I get really riled up. Is like I want to establish what something is.
Yeah.
I want to know what it is.
Right.
And if I don't know what it is, I'm going to work to find a way to make it make sense according to my paradigm. And active imagination is something I've struggled with because I can't find a way to like define it properly.
Yeah. It's at its core in a technique that's being used to integrate and understand unconscious material, as we're sort of circumambulating right now. It's about creating this bridge between ego, conscious awareness, and that deep layer of psyche. So in this process, you're giving voice, as you're saying, letting the unconscious speak or becoming a witness to the natural ways in which the unconscious is breathing and moving. And, it doesn't really want to talk to us necessarily. It's almost like we open up, the door and we're peering inside. And it's like, what's going on here? And we are doing this in a more conscious, more intentional way, rather than when we are exposed to the unconscious contents of dreams. We're asleep and ego is kind of there in a little fraction of its true form. So active imagination is an attempt to bridge that space in waking reality and to allow us to really dive into unconscious material.
Right. And, it's difficult to make sense of this because you're not necessarily going full unconscious, you might say.
No.
And I mean, even the word unconscious is difficult because we think of someone like actually like passing out onto the floor and like, oh, they're unconscious.
Yeah.
And that's not exactly what we mean when we're talking about the unconscious. It's like you want to let the unconscious express itself fully if you can. You don't want to be too much in rational ego mode or it's not going to happen. It's not working. And so you and I are talking right now. We're being pretty rational. We're being pretty conscious.
Yeah.
We're definitely not just letting the unconscious express itself. It's like that's not happening right now for me. Like I'm exerting a lot of control over what I'm saying, where this conversation is going. I have a structure. I'm looking at my phone to make sense of where we're going.
Yeah.
And active imagination is almost trying to find a way to let that structuring impositional aspect of your being, which is trying to frame things and maintain a straight ahead narrative and make things seem linear.
Yeah.
That's trying to say, like, look, 5 minutes ago you were in the kitchen. Now you're here. Yeah. That's your story that you're living right now. And this is where you're going to go after this. You're going to go make dinner in an hour. It's like consciousness is trying to do that. We're trying to have consciousness, in some sense, step aside a little bit and let the unconscious breathe and not have ego stepping in to be like, wait.
Yeah.
Wait, it's like, you're going into like a weird territory, unconscious. I don't want to go there. Let's not go there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And what that means, what that entails, it could be a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
It could be unlimited, you might say, in the way you might approach this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to hold the tension between consciousness being present, to be a witness, and to maintain the connection while also recognizing how to release and how to let go and how to allow some other part of yourself to come forward. And so that principle, that idea alone, for some might be really intuitive and natural. It's like, yeah, okay, I can slip into that. For others, it's incredibly difficult. And so working with active imagination may just for a while be the process of training yourself similar to a meditation practice to quiet the mind, except now we're quieting ego consciousness. We're saying, let down that need for control. Let's not worry about the continuity. What comes up might not make sense. That's okay. Let it happen.
So how can we maybe put forward some examples of what this might be? I mean, this is related to shamanic journeying.
Yeah, I think
in some way. There's overlap there. We don't want to say they're the exact same thing. Yeah. Excuse me, but shamanic journeying is something that people listening might be more familiar with. Perhaps maybe less familiar with.
Yeah.
But that's an example of entering this realm, right? And what does that look like? Journeying. How do we describe that?
Journeying. Not that I'm fully informed of all traditions with shamanic journeying, but from my own practices and experiences with it, there's first and foremost an intentionality that's going into this process of journeying deep within yourself. And through the shamanic framework, there's this kind of like mythological environment. There's the lower world, the middle world, the upper world. So there's like, you're working in an entire framework with journeying, but it's great because it sets up a container for you to explore these dynamics. So there's an intentionality. You're often being induced into a more trance-like meditative state, often with by sound. Drumming is the most typical, but you might also have like rattles or things like that. A certain like BPM should be hit so that it kind of allows you to, I don't know, like you feel like you're being cradled in in like this vortex of like really powerful sound. So within that, you're setting a stage and an environment, and you're intentionally going to move into a space inside of yourself, so like maybe the lower world,
Yeah.
to gain some clarity, to interact with some sort of figures, and then you follow this journey through a, what I would say is like a very imaginative, imagistic, kind of meditative style practice. For me, it's highly visual. Not that I actually see the pictures or the images, but you know, it's like you're imagining it, but it's not quite of your own creation. So anyways, journeying is a very similar framework as active imagination, but it's kind of contained in its own kind of like a cultural framework.
Right. So I imagine there's this idea that you're sort of observing what's happening as opposed to controlling what's happening.
Yeah.
And again, this gets weird because, like, who are you exactly?
Yeah.
If you are not controlling what's happening, what you are we referring to? So
Right.
we're kind of talking about the ego.
Right. Yes, we are. We're talking about ego.
Right. So when we say you, this sort of autobiographical I, it's like if I was journeying, I wouldn't be making what's happening, whatever I'm seeing, whatever I'm experiencing, whatever I'm feeling, I wouldn't be making that happen.
Yeah.
As if there's some sort of setting. It's like I'm not trying to fill the setting with my own contents. It's almost like I'm just sort of observing the setting fill itself.
Yes.
And this isn't the best analogy, but it reminds me of sort of that movie Being John Malkovich, where it's like the person crawls through this tunnel and they end up being inside John Malkovich and they can't do anything. They're just observing as John Malkovich lives his life. And like they're basically experiencing this story, but they're not in control.
Right.
And so it's like John Malkovich is going around and he's saying things and he's doing things
doing
and he's
his
touching things.
thing. Yeah.
And someone else is inside him watching the entire time. And it's almost like when you're journeying, there's kind of just like this observational thing of like your unconscious is doing something.
Yeah.
It's telling a story. It's filling this setting with contents, but you're not really controlling any of it.
Yeah.
And
It's, I
throughout
like,
the movie, this is the other part of the analogy. Throughout the movie, the person who is observing John Malkovich do things, he starts trying to exert more and more control until eventually he can actually control John Malkovich, and he just takes him over. And it's almost like the ego wants to be like, let me force what's going to happen in the journeying process, and you don't want to do that, right?
yeah.
That's kind of the point: is you want to let go.
Yeah, you want to
and
let
just
go.
kind of observe what had happened.
I like this example of the movie, which I haven't seen, by the way, but this
should watch
idea of
it.
like
It's on Netflix.
tunneling in through is so classic to shamanic journeying, specifically with like the lower world. You naturally, it's not even like they tell you this, but like naturally this seems to happen, is like you burrow lower and lower and you're often kind of moving through a tunnel. Like for me, it's like I look for some sort of entrance into the lower world, which might be like under a rock, or I might just like dive into the ocean and I just keep going down, down and down. And then I'll hit like a tunnel and then I'm running. I don't know why I'm always run. I think it has a lot to do with the drum beat, but I'm always like running and then I like kind of blast out into this like other stage. And it's like this really natural setting. And then things start to unfold.
Right.
So anyways, that kind of tunneling deeper into the unconscious is very present for the shamanic imagery that comes up, and being a witness, as we're saying, to what is happening, while at the same time holding that tension between how can I be present and conscious to what's happening, how can I interact with it without exerting too much control. So it isn't nothing, it isn't a total releasing.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of both.
And there's an interesting, when people do shamanic journeying, at least this is a stereotype, I would say, but often it's sort of drugs are mixed in to the process. Often meaning if this is like legitimate shamanic journeying. I guess often there's like sort of like ayahuasca or stuff like that, right? That's sort
I
of
don't even know if like classic like ayahuasca, what do they call them, ceremonies and stuff, is like they're trying to take you through classic journeying, but rather like taking pretty intense psychedelics will throw you into a very similar space of like the unconscious material rising up,
Right,
but
right.
like it's flooding you instead of you easing into it.
Right,
And
with the psychedelics in general, it's just, I mean, the experience of psychedelics is sort of, I mean, it's not as if like when you're taking psychedelics that you are suddenly doing active imagination or you're suddenly
Right,
journeying, but
right,
you can
right.
understand the idea that when you take psychedelics, it's like, what's happening?
right, yes.
It's like, well, often the unconscious contents that are normally
Yeah.
well, I don't want to say buried
It's
necessary,
it's
but
dammed, right?
right,
And
it's
then
dammed up.
the floodgates open.
Well, hopefully you don't have a flood because, I mean, if you're having a really
Some
bad
people
trip,
do.
some people do, and you have a really, really
Or
bad
you
trip
take
and you
really
just
strong
lose
drugs,
your
like,
mind.
oof,
But you
yeah.
can kind of just understand this concept here of like when you take psychedelics, you are in some sense opening a door to the unconscious contents, and they will start pouring out.
Yes, they
and
will.
then things will start happening where it's like you'll start thinking and feeling things that you would not think or feel when you were sober. You might start over predicting your visual
Yeah.
field, where you'll start hallucinating essentially,
Right, yeah.
where your vision is starting to kind of project more intensely. And you're already doing this when you're awake. You're already actually projecting
Yeah.
your reality in some sense, but like it's doing so in a way where it's going a little over the top, and the unconscious contents are now like leaking into what you're seeing.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
patterns are moving, and maybe you see leaves on the ground, and then to you they like look like cockroaches or something like that. And like you probably know they're not actually cockroaches, but you
Right.
can still kind of be like, "Whoa, it kind of looks like they're moving." And you can understand how like the whole experience of psychedelics, the reason people do take psychedelics as an entheogen is because it can be useful. Obviously it's just fun for people. It's mostly,
Yeah.
I'd say, why people take psychedelics, because it's like entertaining. But that the contents below the surface are welcomed up. I mean, with drugs, it's like they're forced up. It's like chemically induced.
Yeah, yeah.
But that journeying and active imagination, maybe I would say, is trying to get in touch with those unconscious contents
Yes.
in a way that doesn't involve drugs.
Yes.
It isn't chemically induced. It's a way of getting into a meditative practice that allows the same contents to come to the surface
Yes.
and you observe them.
Yes, much more sort of sustainably. The pace of which the unconscious is like building on itself is not going to be exponentially like growing from one moment to the next as it does with psychedelics. It's like it's like 0 to 100 sometimes. You know, working with shamanic journeying or active imagination is a much more controlled environment, and specifically there's lots of ways to practice journeying that it's not drug related at all. It's often by sound, as I mentioned earlier.
Right.
So you're inducing a type of altered consciousness, you might say, by music, and I personally find it incredibly powerful. Like the music sets the stage for me, and like having it either live or in my ears with the headphones, it's like I can drop right in, and you can do this in a way that's a little bit of a safer container rather than the path of psychedelics.
Right. And so some of the other things that are mentioned, let's say, in this process of active imagination, there are some notions of this practice being channeled through artistic mediums.
Yeah.
This is something that I kind of have a problem with, that I've argued with Alyssa about, because a lot of it to me is like, well, that's just being creative. Like any creative act is like this, but still, this is something that is written about, that like part of active imagination could be that you are letting the unconscious contents express themselves, and what happens is you're doing that through dance, and you're sort of expressing something, you're channeling something that's within you that is not the ego making decisions, where the ego is like, okay, left foot out, right foot out, shake it all about, like ego is telling you what to do. It's like, no, the unconscious is just like, you just find yourself moving and you're dancing and your body is wiggling, or you're sort of finding this energy flow through you, and you're sort of letting the unconscious express itself in some way.
Right.
That could also be true for, I mean, any creative act you could think of. I mean, if you were painting, you might paint something and you have no idea where it came from, and it might even freak you out because you just have let the unconscious sort of speak onto the paper. You might be writing something and you're just not thinking about it, but just writing.
Yeah.
Might not even be grammatically, it might not even make any sense or be coherent, but you might just be writing all these words. They're just kind of like fire and destruction and death. And it's like, where is it coming from? It's like, well, the unconscious is sort of speaking through you.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that all this is active imagination, but
Right.
it's still, you're kind of trying to, again, we're circumambulating something.
Right.
There's something about the unconscious expressing itself. And that's what creative people do. They harness the unconscious to generate material.
Yes.
Where did this song come from that I wrote? It's like, I don't know. It just appeared. I just found the song like in me.
Yeah.
And it's like, so did you sit down and compose it? It's like, or did you just sort of let it compose itself? And that's the weird concept, right?
Yeah.
It's like it composed itself. And usually when we normally think about ourselves, like that doesn't really compute.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what do you mean it just composed itself? But in reality, that's actually what we're doing. The unconscious is actually driving a lot of our actions.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that we create, and we do creative acts daily. I mean, even cooking is, very creative. Like a lot of things we do, we don't think of as being like art, but it's creative.
Yeah.
And there's something bubbling up to the surface if we let it that just expresses itself.
Yeah.
And active imagination is trying to tap into this creative energy.
Yeah, I think, the literature that brings this up is trying to recognize that people will have certain tendencies where they're going to find it easier to drop into that space of active imagination using these different mediums. And I don't know, I feel like in my experience, it would be really hard for me to translate some of that out of the more like meditative, imaginative journeying style. But I could very easily understand that somebody else who's maybe not as visual as I am would like look at my technique and just be like, I cannot do this. It does not make sense. So what might an alternative be?
So what might be like the, if someone was going to try and enter into active imagination in a very basic, straightforward way, what would be the process?
Yeah.
How would you go about doing that, let's say?
Yeah. So we come back in first to working with the unconscious image. So where is this coming from? Or if it's not an image, it's something that's been born from a relatively less conscious manifestation, so maybe a mood that's come up, a dream figure, maybe this kind of daydream feeling or emotional undercurrent, whatever it is, we're trying to grasp and anchor into something. So we're not starting at zero. We want to work within some sort of framework that's giving you a place to start so that you're not just, opening up, the door to nothing. So what is the dream image? What is the character? What is the tone or mood, the bad mood that you are in? Like personify the bad mood and start there, right? So you select and anchor that unconscious image in your mind with that focus, and you kind of start to move into that trance-like altered consciousness state, which maybe sounds intense, but really it's just about allowing yourself to drop in. And for me, that comes with some deep meditative breathing, with clearing my mind and allowing myself to feel present, yet consciousness not just being super, super alert. And I hold that image in my mind, and then it's about letting it move. What happens to it? As you drop in and the unconscious image takes shape, does it shift in some way? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're just like staring at this image in your mind and nothing's happening. So this is where ego can come in. Ask it a question. What do you represent for me? Or why did you appear in this dream? This is why we create the bridge between consciousness and the unconscious, because it isn't necessarily just going to, you put the unconscious image on the TV and it's going to start just playing. It's like, no, you have to work for it sometimes. So it's that dance between ego and unconscious. So what narrative is forming, or what tone is coming up? How are things shifting? We're letting the image breathe. You're letting it speak. Like literally sometimes you kind of feel like you're picking up on certain words that are coming to you. Maybe it's just an inner knowing. Maybe a new image emerges. So ask a question, cultivate a dialogue, walking that line between inquiry and active listening. And you kind of go through that process. for me, I like to have something playing in the background that allows me to have like a contained amount of time, usually about like 8 minutes, so that, I'm not just kind of lost in it or
like music.
Yeah.
You mean
Yeah.
it's like 8 minutes of music.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have a track playing in my ears.
And this is presumably like a very repetitive music.
Yeah, actually, like my favorite.
Like you're not playing Stairway to Heaven for 8 minutes
No,
or something
so
like that.
yeah, this is where that kind of like, what's your favorite meditation music?
Right.
Like, I actually listened to this Brian Eno song, so it's like instrumental and it's like very cosmic-y sounding. It's called Stars. I've been listening to it for years. It's kind of like my unintentional meditation song. I don't know why, it just kind of happened, but it's 8 minutes long, like nearly, and I find that to be a great amount of time for doing active imagination, like long enough to experience some things and explore, but not too long. So you do that dialogue, you follow the images, things grow and move, and you interact and you witness, and then after that you come out of it. You just become more present in your body, and not that it necessarily feels like you've been gone. But just, similar to if you've been like lying in Shavasana after a yoga class, it's like, you're kind of waking back up. And then it's all about processing what came from this experience. Now it's time for integration and assimilation of those unconscious contents. So what insights were gained? How does this apply to your current understanding of yourself or other conscious states? What does this unconscious content bring up for you? What new perspective? Is it a compensation? You have to sit with it, journal about it, concretize it then. You could draw or do something artistic even after the active imagination.
Can you give us an example of yourself doing this? I'm sort of bypassing our structure here that we have written down, but like I feel like that's the intuitive place to go.
Sure.
So
it would be helpful.
Explaining this process.
Yeah.
You've done it yourself. Can you sort of illustrate a real life example of what you have done with this and how it came about?
Yeah, well, for today's episode, I wanted to do an active imagination on a dream image based on the Dream series, which was, I don't know, episode 23, 22? 18. Wow, I'm super off. Anyways, Alyssa Dream series. Check it out because this will make much more sense if you listen to that episode already. I wanted to give you guys something to consider because you've heard that dream before and we talked about it, and now I'm building on it. So the dream image that I wanted to anchor into was that of the bear, which appeared in 2 dreams. The first one being I came upon a dead bear on a path and skinned it and like turned it into a coat and wore it. And then the second dream is going up a mountain path and there are all these wolves and it's really cool. And then there's a bear and I freak out and there's like, I run away and I still haven't quite figured out to me what that symbol of the bear represents. So that's my goal with this active imagination. Here's this unconscious image. What does it symbolize for me?
Yeah.
Anyways, I did this active imagination earlier because for me, doing it live doesn't really work.
You mean this morning?
Yeah. So very quickly, first and foremost, it's about setting the environment. So I've got my song. I like to either like light a candle or burn some sage. It makes me feel really relaxed.
What's the song?
Brian Eno's song called Stars. So there's no lyrics, I would recommend doing something instrumental. Sometimes I'll listen to.
Right. You want kind of like ambiance.
Yeah,
as
ambiance.
Opposed to like a story structure, which a lot of like, I mean, it just sounds strange, but like a lot of like pop music is actually sort of like a story where it's like you're going somewhere and there's a climax and then you kind of finish it out. Like you want something that's a little more
it would
kind
just
of
be
like
too distracting.
Right. You want something that's more of kind of like an atmosphere.
Yeah, atmospheric. Or I also have a track of shamanic drumming, which is like really great. So sometimes.
What's the tempo of the music that you like? Is there a tempo or is it kind of just
it's different because the shamanic. Yeah, I would say like the Brian Eno song's more like that. It's like
the shamanic music is kind of like
it's like
yeah.
Yeah, it's got like a really intense pace to it, and I think that's why I always run in my active imaginations or in my journeying, shamanic journeying.
That sounds kind of intense, honestly.
It doesn't stay that intense though, but
is that the tempo? Like
you've listened to it before. Do you remember?
I'm trying to recall.
It is.
Wow, it just sounds like sprinting. It's like,
I know, because when I drop in from the ground and I'm in the tunnel, I always run.
Wow. Okay.
And then I kind of burst out and then I start walking. So it's not like really intense the whole time.
Sure.
At some point, it almost feels like the music just sort of slips away.
Right, of course.
So anyways, listening to atmospheric Brian Eno, I'm feeling relaxed and I'm bringing up that dream image of the bear. So I'm anchoring into that and closing my eyes, taking some deep breaths, and I'm fairly practiced in this so I can get into this state pretty quickly. So I'm just going to kind of read through what I wrote.
Is it visual? The anchor, is it an image, a visual image of the bear?
It's that's the intention, right? Is the bear. But when I entered into it, it was like pre-bear. It was like 2 steps before the bear.
Pre-bear. All right, I'll let you go ahead and read it. Yeah.
Okay, so I bring the image of the bear into my mind's eye, but then it changes, and I'm walking up the mountainside, and I can feel the heaviness of the pack on my back. Suddenly, there's the rush of the wolf pack, and I can feel my heart kind of running with them. I feel the parts of me that are wild and free, the canine playfulness, the responsibility and belonging of being in a pack. I easily relate to these dream images. They remind me of who I am and what I know of myself, but I sense the challenge on the horizon. I am walking up the mountain path, attempting to ascend the mountain and reach the summit. The bear is blocking the way, but I do not run this time. I feel the echoes of the fear in me, though. I sense the support that the wolves had given me earlier to run forward into the challenge bravely. I am consciously reaching out, trying to understand what it represents. In a way, I'm asking the bear, who are you? What do you represent to me? And I feel a deeply feminine presence echoing an answer back. The scene changes, and I am standing in front of the dead bear. In a previous dream, I came upon its body as if it was an offering. There is emergent property in me, and I will call it the archetypal force of the mother. This is a mother bear, fiercely protective of her young, capable, independent. I am realizing that there is something deeply instinctive in me that knows how to work with this symbol. Just as in the dream, I begin removing her hide and wear it as a coat. I know how to step into this role. It is about motherhood, but more importantly, about mothering. It is about the nurturance that I naturally extend to the world that needs to be turned inward, to the wounded child within that needs to be cared for, to evolving the inner feminine to be stable and grounded in herself. I am now making connections to many dreams I have had of babies and children where they fall from my grasp. I want to care and parent them, but something is always going wrong. I am never able to hold them. There is a deep resistance and fear, a threshold that is waiting to be crossed. I both embrace and reject this part of myself. I nurture while also being absent. I am critical while also birthing new creation. The bear demands a new transformation.
So, you sit down. You light some incense or something. Or you cleanse your room. I'm not sure what you said. You have the music play. And then you essentially meditate.
Yeah.
You try to drop into this place where this can happen.
Yeah.
And then what you were just reading is what you start to experience.
Yeah.
You're feeling these things.
Yeah.
Are you seeing these things in some sense? Is it very visual? Or
Kind
is it
of.
more kind of like emotional?
It's certainly not something that's like I'm seeing it like a movie. Like it's that visual and it's that real. So it's like an emotionally toned, feeling spaced, imagery driven experience. It's like the best way to explain it.
And is it, would you say it's like similar to like a dream? Like,
Yes.
do you feel like you're dreaming while you're awake?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the same process is almost happening.
Yeah, because I almost feel like in my dreams, it's like I don't know if I really see those images,
Right.
but I know what's happening, and I could explain it to you. And if I had to, this is what's happening in the environment. This is what that character looked like. I could tell you, but I don't think I'm experiencing it as a really realistic image.
And then when does it end? It's just when the music stops playing.
Yeah, often like, especially what's great about this track is it kind of like fades out slowly. So there's something natural that takes me out.
Right. Doesn't just end abruptly.
No.
Where it's like the mama bear is like, and here is the wisdom. It's over. Sorry, no wisdom this time.
That could happen, right? You just kind of get like knocked out of the space. But no, it was
imagining like a record scratch like at the end of the music.
Yeah, I'd say it. But I've had other times when, and I'll specifically put it on a loop. So it kind of like fades out and then it fades back in. And sometimes I'll keep going. So if I feel that's necessary, I will. But often, to me, like around 8 minutes is a good amount of time. And I'm following, what's happening. And then everything that I read is like, now it's time for me to transcribe what happened.
And what you wrote down, would you say that this is an analysis that you are projecting back onto what you just experienced? Or do you feel like during the experience, you're actually having these insights? Like you actually realize these things?
Yeah, both.
You're coming to conclusions while it's happening.
Yes, I am coming to conclusions while it's happening.
Afterwards, just being like, what the hell was that? Let me take it apart and make sense of it.
Yeah,
it probably means this,
Yeah, no, I tried to write this as I was experiencing it. So even that's like really hard. And it probably just sounds like, like a dream analysis or something like that. But no, even in the dream, like I've thought about the bear before, but I've not done an active imagination on it. And I've been pretty stumped about what the bear is. And the fact that it felt feminine was very strange to me.
Yeah.
And as that kept building and I was sort of like thinking about it in the active imagination, or it was unfolding, it was like all of these things kept like unfolding and revealing itself. And as I mentioned, it's like I suddenly had this realization of connecting these dreams, which is a total other series for me, of like I dream about kids or like babies often, and it's not violent. I am like dropping them or like they're falling out of my grasp, but they're never like getting hurt or dying.
Sure.
But it's always been really strange to me. And I just very much created a connection during the active imagination of that. So that's why I wrote that, because it did not happen afterwards. It happened in the moment. And it was all of these feelings around mothering and motherhood and mother and child. And all of that was just happening in that moment. And after the fact, this didn't happen during the active imagination, but afterwards, I remembered the episode we did on complexes. God, I don't remember that question, but you said something and I said mother in response. And I thought it was really strange. It was something like, that mother, it'd be like, ooh, there could be tension around the mother. I should have gone back and listened, but there was something else after the fact where it's like, okay, there's something going on here. And from a personal place, like, I don't have a lot of gripes or issues with like my personal mother. Sure. So to me, it wasn't like, I was like, man, that was kind of weird when I said that in the complex episode. But now that it's like happening in the active imagination with the bear, she's very feminine. It's a mother bear, all these dynamics around like motherhood. It's like, okay, there's a pattern that's happening here.
Interesting. And surely something like this could be analyzed the same way you might analyze a dream.
Yes.
Right? We do dream analysis. There's not any reason why it should really be any different.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
You're still kind of unpacking unconscious contents and being like, where did this come from? What does it mean?
Yeah.
How does it tie into our notion of like universal archetypes? How might it be a personal kind of archetype that is unique to you? Like the wolves are for you, for instance, is sort of kind of unique to you. Also kind of based on something that's universal.
Yeah. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what's happening. I know it's still hard to grasp. And I think that's part of it is it's a weird space, and recognizing that we're dropping into this imaginative unconscious realm. It's hard to put words to.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, that's the nature of it. It's slippery. It's vague.
Yeah.
It's below the surface. It's behind us. All these ways of describing something that's really hard to tap into.
Yeah.
And that's part of the thing is like you're trying to look for it and you can't find it. And it's almost like if you just stop looking, it'll come to you. which is very interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think that was an excellent illustration for anyone listening of
Cool.
what this could be. But you know, the other side of this is like, I can't do that, right?
Well,
And that's the next stage of this conversation. Is like, what you're describing is something that like I've tried, and it's just like, I don't get this. Nothing is happening.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what you're talking about. Like this is something that you can do. To me, it's like, no, you can't.
Right.
Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
And so this is like, I try it, and I'm like, I'm just kind of like thinking about like my work as I close my eyes. It's like, well, like get into like a mindfulness meditation. It's like, well, I could do that. I mean, I could kind of just empty my mind.
Sure.
And I can kind of just focus on sensations, and I can kind of try to find like the center of myself in all these ways. But that's still like, that's not the same thing as like this journey you're describing.
Right.
And that's what's interesting. You know, it's interesting to examine because like we have different personality types.
Yes.
That might be a factor. There's different experiences we've had. Certainly we've been touched in different ways by reality that has activated different sides of us. And
Yeah.
I'm certainly a more sort of like analytical thinking type than you are.
Yeah.
But this whole idea that like you're trying to get the ego in some sense to step aside, or you're trying to stop the impositional, structuring, ordering aspect of your personality. You're trying to stop it from doing what it does and let the unconscious be free.
Yeah.
And the structuring, ordering aspect of my personality is very intense and superior.
Super strong.
And I can't get it to step aside very easily.
Yes, but I think that's why the adaptive technique that has been developed for you is interesting. And yes, it might not be the most like classic traditional form of active imagination, but like we don't care about that.
No,
I care about what works and what moves you. So maybe it's a hybrid.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's hard to say, and like I'm about to describe my own version essentially of active imagination, and I feel hesitant to call it active imagination because it's it kind of doesn't really sound the same as what you're describing. But you know, we're just exploring this whole realm. It's like letting the unconscious speak. What does it take for that to happen for you? And for me, I've found that something that does do something to me and does activate some unconscious contents, and very specifically something that makes me emotional, something that can get me to cry, is this other way of approaching this, which is not something I've really even read about anyone else doing. I'm sure I'm just like, oh, I invented this. It's like, no, I didn't invent this, but I certainly didn't read about it anywhere. I just sort of like came up with it. And if there's anything that can get me to cry, it's like pretty few things, but like this can, and that's what's interesting.
Yeah.
It's like, what does that mean?
Yeah, like
What's
every
happening?
time.
Anyways, so what I'm describing is what I'm calling self mythologizing, where it's like I am toying with a personal myth, and the easiest way to describe this is I am writing a story the same way that you might write a novel, or the same way you might stand up at a campfire and just make up a story, whatever that process would be. Once upon a time, there was a boy. I'm doing that, like literally. It's saying, okay, so there's a character, and his name's Arran. Where is he?
Yeah.
He's in the desert. It's like, okay, what is he doing? It's like he's lost. And so I'm actually, saying these things out loud. And when Alyssa and I have done it, I'm actually talking to her as I do this, and that seems to work. Whereas like I can't just stay inside my head and do it. It doesn't seem to work. I actually have to like speak it.
Yeah.
But what I'm doing is I'm creating some kind of structure, some kind of framework that the unconscious can fill. And so there's more of an egoic imposition happening here than you might say would be typical of active imagination. But another facet of this is like I've divided my personality into like 6 characters, which is not something set in stone. It's useful.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do 7 characters eventually. Maybe I'll eliminate one because it's like that one doesn't really work. But there's essentially a character that's a little boy. There's a character that's like a really cold, robotic, calculating king or commander of some kind. There's a weird, sneaky mischievous trickster
Yeah.
that just pranks everyone all the time.
Yeah.
There's a higher consciousness character that's like God, basically. It's like the self,
Yeah.
the Jungian self, but it's like the highest form of what I could be, what's calling me to become. I'm like trying to become this through individuation, you would say. And the last character is kind of the most hard to describe, but essentially some like form of like pure like darkness and chaos. And then there's me. Excuse me. Bubble in my throat. And then there's me. I'm the last character, and me as I am now. The way that I sort of picture myself as being real in this world, it's like I'm somehow traveling into a fantasy world.
Yeah.
And interacting with these characters, and this seems to activate some place that's very emotional and heavy and painful to me when I do this in a way that I can't do when I'm just talking about myself. So we'll try and illustrate this live
Okay.
in some way. And that doesn't mean I'm about to like get into like a place where I start bawling over the air. I don't think that's going to happen, but just to kind of illustrate like what I am talking about.
Yeah.
And one way we could anchor it just to start is like, if we're about to move to Arizona, and I'm going to try and tell a story about what's happening and why. And I haven't thought about this at all going in beforehand. I'm just going to try and make it up as I go and try in some sense to let it just bubble up to the surface. And hopefully that's letting the unconscious speak. While the ego is still kind of close by to sort of like lay down a framework. So,
Okay.
and Alyssa's going to ask me questions as I go
Yeah.
in an attempt to prod and challenge me. And
Yeah.
maybe that'll help, or maybe it'll be distracting. It's that you never know. So
Sometimes it's both.
sometimes it's both. So we're going to try this for just a little bit and just to kind of illustrate a different version of this.
Okay. We often start this by wanting to know how Arran, as he is going to kind of move into this story, or how he's going to kind of access where we're going or find the other characters. So set the stage for us, Arran. How are you getting into this place?
Okay. So I'm here right now in my room in real life. And the higher consciousness version of me, whose name is Arcus, it's the name that I've given him, is going to transport me to the desert in Arizona, which is where we're moving.
Are you there?
Yeah.
What do you see?
It's flat. There's no buildings. There's no people. It's just the sun is low in the sky. There's very stereotypical like cacti around. There's creatures like snakes and scorpions and jackrabbits and vultures. And it's almost like a cartoon desert. But that's where I am.
Why?
Because it's where I have to go. There's no map, and there's no path, and there's no shelter. It's just sort of a vacuous, emptiness that I need to step into. For some reason, I need to leave behind the structure that I've been in.
Where is Arcus?
Arcus, who is the God version of me, the higher consciousness version, is somewhere in the sky above me. And he sort of floats and takes on a very stereotypical meditative posture with his eyes closed. And it's as if he knows everything that's going to happen. And he has absolute power to control what will happen. But he's not going to do anything. He's just there to hold the space, you might say. Maybe intervene if something that's not meant to be is going to happen.
Who are you going to be meeting in this space?
it's not clear to me that anyone's going to be there at all. It seems like I'm just going to wander into some kind of gorge, some kind of valley of some kind that's empty. But I'm just walking towards it.
Do you have anything with you?
I have my knife, which is the knife I really own in real life, which is a camping knife. It's prominent in my dreams, but it's with me. I have a water bottle, like a canteen, that's hooked to my belt. I have a white t-shirt and jeans and boots and my Mawa necklace, and that's it.
What are you doing right now?
I'm walking through the valley.
Anything that catches your eye?
There's a crystal for some reason in the wall of the valley.
Are you going to go over to it?
Yeah, it sort of catches my eye. It's like shining into my eyes. That's why I notice it. So I walk over to it. It's almost like I'm treasure hunting or something. It's purple, so the size of my fist. And I reach over and try to remove it from the wall, but I can't. It's stuck.
Are you meant to get it?
I don't know. I feel like I am, but I also doubt myself, knowing what the hell I'm doing out here. But I take out my knife and I try to dislodge it by sticking the knife into the wall. And as I do this, the knife point snaps off and the knife slips and I cut my hand really badly. And I start to freak out because I'm alone and I don't have any first aid or anything. And I also broke my knife, which is really not cool because I like this knife a lot. And I'm just sort of sitting there on the ground bleeding really badly and trying to stop the bleeding. And there's vultures overhead who seem to be knowing what's happening. And I'm wondering why Arcus won't help me. But I also know that he can't because this is meant to happen for some reason.
Someone else supposed to help you?
I don't know. But the episode ends there. And you're left hanging, wondering what's going to happen next. Because it seems like Arran's in a lot of trouble. And it kind of zooms out slowly, like bird's eye view. It zooms out of the valley. And you can see Arran sitting on the ground bleeding profusely. And there's some kind of like silly, over-the-top Western music that plays as it zooms out. And then I'm back here in the room.
Okay. I think it's interesting. The knife breaking. It's a pretty prominent theme in your actual dreams, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this in previous episodes, but the knife is a significant symbol for me. Excuse me. And my, I don't think it's that mysterious what the knife represents. I think the knife kind of represents like power and agency, and it kind of represents like the logos in some way. The logos meaning like the thing that creates order, or like brings things into proper being, you might say. But I don't know. Things are always going wrong with my knife in my dreams, which usually is some sort of commentary on like feelings of failure or powerlessness, or the inability to make things work properly, or breaking my power by trying to use it, injuring myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, to someone listening, like what I just did, like I feel like it's very easy to sound like, well, you just like made that up. Like you're just talking while you make that up. And it's like, that's not anything that interesting. But I didn't go into that thinking about what was going to happen at all.
Yeah.
I just sort of started talking, and it's not the same as journeying, obviously. And it's not as simple as like, well, the unconscious is just like sort of speaking, and you're just letting it speak. It's like, this is a little bit different, but still it's like, there's something. Why was the story about being lost by myself in the desert, and then like trying to accomplish something, like trying to reach for something valuable and beautiful, or something that like represents like the key. And in doing so, I break my power and agency and sit there dying. That to me seems to speak to some serious fear.
Yeah.
About what's about to happen. Some doubt and some anxiety around this move as being something that's like, what if I'm just totally going to fuck myself up doing this? Leaving like what I know in favor of taking like a leap to kind of become what I think I need to become.
Yeah.
But, the story wasn't over, because it's never
It's
over.
true. Yes.
So we could have kept going, and who knows where it would have gone.
Honestly, when we do these, your versions, the self-mythologizing, they go on for like an hour, which is also very untypical for like classic active imagination or shamanic journeying. And it's different, right? Like there's a dynamic happening between us, and I'm kind of asking questions. I have no idea where you're going with it.
Yeah.
So this is a very different approach, but I think it's really powerful, and I think it's tapping into similar dynamics.
I think so. It'd be interesting. I mean, because I could theoretically probably just keep on going until I just like got way too tired to keep talking, or too hungry.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to see like if you were actually kind of really doing an intense session where you like were trying to do it all day.
Yeah.
Where you might go. I mean, who knows? Because part of me feels like I might actually like work through some things by doing that.
Yeah.
In a way that like seems kind of like strange. Like, how can that happen? Where it's like, well, I just like wrote a novel today about myself, and in the novel this happened, and now I feel a lot better about like where I'm going. I feel like I have a better idea of what my story is. And the thing about this is going to be a longer episode than usual, but that's what happens when you try to demonstrate these kind of practices. But there's something about narrative and myth and story that is more real to us than real life.
Yeah.
And I've said this before, but this is like an important thing to understand, is that we tend to think of like a story or like a movie as being fictional. And there's no truth in it, basically. It's just like, well, it's just a story. It's not real. But it's kind of backwards often, because the stories are usually more real to us than reality in a way, because we tend to think of reality as being sort of like this material, objective thing, and that's reality. But the thing is, like, what's more real to us is our story, is our myth, is our experience. And so you watch a movie, for instance, you watch Children of Men, which, dropped my phone. You watch Children of Men, which is my favorite movie. And I feel like when you do that, you're seeing a snapshot of the world. It's a gateway to what the world is actually like, and what's really happening to us, and the crisis of humanity that we're experiencing right now. And you actually see it. you actually see the crisis. You actually see reality. You actually see humanity and for what it is through the movie.
Yeah.
Like it's a gateway to truth. And you see it better than if you turn on the news. You turn on the news and you think you're seeing what's real. But to most people, the news is just kind of, it doesn't compute really. It's kind of boring. It's easy to sort of like ignore it.
Yeah.
Whereas like, oh, a tsunami just like killed like 20,000 people in Indonesia. Huh. Okay. Like back to my normal day. It's like, you don't actually register that that's real. Right. But if you watched a movie about the tsunami, you would cry and you might be like, holy shit. Like, I can't believe this actually happened to people. Like, oh my God, it's being dramatized in front of me. And so the story is actually more real than what happens if you try to just like look out your window at reality. It's like you don't really see what's real. You don't really see the world.
Yeah.
And you try to like read a history book or watch the news and you're not really seeing what's real, but you look through a story and you can kind of make contact with what's real in this strange way that's sort of counterintuitive. And so I think of this self-mythologizing as in some sense, it's making contact with who I really am. That's different than if I was going to look at a literal factual timeline of my life and be like, oh, okay, all this stuff happened to me. Or I'm looking in the mirror and that's really me. It's like, no, the story of me, this myth of me is actually in some sense more real.
Yeah.
And that's why it makes me emotional, I would say.
Yeah. Psyche has a narrative structure embedded deep within it. You know, we've talked about this with dreams. We've talked about this in our personal myth episode. To me, narrative is one of the cornerstones of just psychic reality. So even for me doing my more like journeying style active imagination, it feels like a story that's unfolding. And when you dream and you do dream work, you recognize that there's a narrative structure, that there's a dramatic structure that's happening here. You're merely externalizing that process and we're talking through it and that works for you. But the principle is still really similar. So it's a way for you to tap into that, you know, constant narrative that's happening inside of us and to view it and get another episode of it and then to work with it and understand it more and ask yourself what it reveals about what you're going through right now.
Yeah, and I think that what this really illustrates, and this is part of the point of exploring what you do and what I do, is that like you have to figure out what works for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what Alyssa is describing, it might not work for you. What I'm describing probably won't work for you, but maybe it will. It depends on your personality type. And you can experiment around with self-expression essentially in meditative states. And you can build something for yourself that helps you tap into this realm of buried, banished material and bring it into conscious awareness. And it's true for any practice. It's just you have to find one that is shaped and has been sculpted to unlock who you are. And it might take time to do that, but it's certainly worth it. Do you have a question for us? Do you have a dream you'd like us to analyze? Is there a topic you'd like us to cover?
We want to hear from you. Contact us through the submission form, which can be found at our Instagram page at Golden Shadow Podcast. Or if you're listening on YouTube, you can find the link in the description down below.
Thanks for listening.
See you later.
If you find this podcast useful, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Golden Shadow Podcast. Thank you.